Just over 2 years ago, I recorded this very unique little slider, the C-Pan Mini from 9.Solutions. Well, if you couldn't guess by the name of the C-Pan Mini, there is also a larger version of that, just the C-Pan, which is of course larger, stronger, and more full-featured. Now today, I'm very excited to bring you the updated version to that, which you can see sitting right behind me here, the C-Pan Mark II. So let's get into it. Alright, so just getting right into it, thank you again to the guys at 9.Solutions for providing me with the C-Pan Mark II to test and review. They're awesome guys behind all the awesome products that they have available. If you have a chance to talk to them at a trade show or something like that, I highly recommend you do it. They're great people. But I do want to stress that this is not a paid or sponsored review. I will also have another video that will be sponsored by them featuring the C-Pan Mark II, but this is not it. This is my honest opinion and my honest review. Also, this is a pre-production model, so there may be some slight differences between this and the final version. So if you pick one of these up, or if you check it out on the website and you see something that's slightly different, that's probably the reason why. Also, as a final little note here, before we jump into the nitty-gritty of this review, I do not have the original C-Pan. I have the Mini, of course, but I do not have the original C-Pan here to show you side-by-side comparisons with the Mark II version. However, I will do my best to show you some photos to stress those differences when I'm talking about them. In this video, we're going to break it down into a few parts. First up, we're going to talk about the differences between the larger C-Pan Mark II and the smaller C-Pan Mini, and we will also talk about some of those differences between the Mark II and the original version. Then in part 2, I will go over kind of the basics of how to get this set up, and then what types of movement you can do with it and how to set it up for those different types of movement. And then in part 3, we'll just kind of sum it up. We'll talk about the things that I like and the things that I don't like, both in comparison to the smaller C-Pan Mini and also just to the other options on the market, more standard sliders and things like that. But parts of this video I will try to get as detailed as possible, so it can kind of drag on a bit. If you want to skip around to the part that is of most interest to you, check out the timeline down below. So besides the actual size and weight of the slider itself, the capacity of the C-Pan or the C-Pan Mark II is also different from the Mini. The Mini has a 5 kilogram horizontal capacity and a 3 kilogram vertical capacity, while the C-Pan Mark II can hold up to 8 kilograms when moving horizontally and up to 6 kilograms when moving vertically. Now the weight of the C-Pan Mini is about 1.5 kilograms, and of course the original larger C-Pan was much heavier. Again, I don't have it here to actually weigh myself, but with the carbon fiber design, even though this C-Pan Mark II is much larger than the Mini, it comes in at under 4.5 kilograms. Now another difference from the C-Pan Mini, and I think one of the most significant differences from the C-Pan Mini, is how to get angled or vertical movements. With the C-Pan Mini, it would just mount onto your tripod or to a ball head or something like that with these screw threads on the bottom. So if you wanted to tilt it sideways at an angle or vertically, you would have to have a ball head under there that could do that. And then of course that takes away from the stability, it takes away from maybe the capacity that you can put on there, because it is now not only relying on the C-Pan, but relying on whatever ball head you have it mounted to. And then of course, if you tilt this sideways, the camera is now going to also be sideways. So if you want to put that camera back up to a standard position, you then need to have a ball head on top of here too. So you've got a ball head underneath, you've got a ball head on top. All of that adds to the size, adds to the weight, adds to the cost, but takes away from the stability. The larger C-Pan, and now of course the C-Pan Mark II, do have a kind of hinge built into the bottom where you mount it to your tripod that can tilt this in some different angles. You can go a 45-degree angle, a 90-degree angle for completely vertical movement, or anything really in between. And there's a rosette type attachment down there, so when you do put it at an angle or vertically, it is rock solid in there, and you don't need any additional ball head or anything underneath it. It's all built into that unit. And then of course there's the actual sled where you mount your camera on, and that can now both tilt up and down as well as side to side. So once you tilt the C-Pan Mark II over to the side, you can then adjust your camera's angle so that way it will be straight ahead or whatever angle it is that you want it at for that shot. So you don't need those additional add-ons to make this work. The only additional thing I think that you might want to add to here is if you want to put a quick release plate on the camera sled, if you typically have one on the bottom of your camera, so that way you can quickly put it on and and take it off. But you can, of course, as I have it right here, just mount your camera straight to that and you don't need anything else. Now, if you combine all of that, all of those things that this can now do without anything additional, together with the movement that you can get from both the C-Pan Mini and this larger C-Pan, you can get that inward type of parallax movement or an outward panning type of slide. You can get just a huge range of movements because you can do all of that horizontally, vertically, or anything in between. But another major difference from the C-Pan Mark II and the C-Pan Mini, as well as an update from the original C-Pan to the C-Pan Mark II, is this counterbalance arm that you can see here. The original C-Pan did also have a counterweight, counterbalance arm that you could attach on the front of it, but it was just straight out ahead. This is now curved, as you can see. It curves down, so that gives you more clearance for wide angle lenses. And I've tested this with up to a 16mm lens, and I've had absolutely no problem. The weights don't get in the way of my framing. Now, this counterbalance arm and some weights are included in the kit, so that's all in that $14.99 price, and it really does help. If you're moving horizontally, you don't need to use it, but I do highly recommend it because as the slider moves out to one side, the counterbalance arm will move out to the other side, and it does help to keep things stable because the weight of your camera on that end is going to balance with the weight of the counterbalance weights on this end. And so even though it's only mounted in the center with a single tripod, it's going to be more stable with this counterbalance arm if you have space for it. Of course, it does stick out in front of the slider, so you have to consider that if you're in a tight area. But in addition to putting some weight on the tripod to keep things stable, this counterbalance arm really does help to keep a nice, smooth, and stable, steady movement, even over the larger range that this has. It has up to 140 centimeters of travel. So if that was on a slider, a standard slider mounted only in the center, you're gonna get a lot of flex at either end, but this counterbalance arm really does help that, and it helps just to keep the tripod from tipping over as well. But the real benefit is when you flip this over and you're going for vertical movement. Now the counterbalance arm really will help to counterbalance that weight of your camera and help you get that up and down movement without having to hold the entire weight of your camera in your hand and then still expect to get steady movement. So having that counterbalance to smooth that out will really help you to get a consistent smooth movement, even though this is of course a manual slider. With the kit, I got 4 1kg weights, but of course you could switch this up for heavier weights, for more weights, or even just hang like a sandbag or something on there if you want. It's just a pole. The size of the pole seems to work with standard dumbbell type weights, so you can kind of mix it up and do whatever you need depending on the weight and size of the camera that you have mounted on there. Now, like I said, you get a huge range of movement from the C-Pan Mark II. The original C-Pan Mini had about 60 centimeters of side-to-side travel. With the C-Pan Mark II, you're getting 140 centimeters of both horizontal and vertical movement. Now, that is pretty huge, especially considering it's only mounted in the center on one tripod, and it is pretty stable despite that. But anyway, those are most of the differences between the larger and smaller C-Pan Mini, as well as some of the key updates from the original C-Pan to this new carbon fiber C-Pan Mark II. So now let's check out what's included, how to set it up, and how to get some different types of movement. So I got this carry case off of Amazon. It does not come with it. I put some of the custom cut foam that it originally came with in the original box just to keep things organized, and it's worked out pretty well. I'll put a link to this down below, but I got it from Amazon Japan, so it might not be available everywhere. I do wish that this came with a custom carry case, whether it was a soft case or a hard case, just something to carry and transport this in from the start. That would be pretty much one of the biggest improvements I think they could make to this. So what we've got here is the C-Pan itself. Under that we've got this large tool to help to tighten it down onto the tripod. We'll check that out in a minute. We've got the arm for the counterweights, and then we've got the counterweights themselves. I also have a couple of clamps for those weights. I think the official version will come with these from 9.Solutions, but this was a pre-production model. I got it without these, so I just grabbed a couple off Amazon. They're just the standard size that you would get for any kind of dumbbell clamp. And that's pretty much what we got, so let's get the case out of the way and get this onto a tripod. So as for the tripod you want to use for this, you just want something heavy duty. They recommend something that can hold up to 20 kilograms. Of course, it needs that 3/8 inch screw thread on the top. This one is from Faisal. It's the CT3472LV, and it's worked out pretty well for me. It has this leveling column, that's the LV in the center. You can loosen this up, and excuse the noise. You can adjust it here to make sure that it's level. The C-Pan doesn't have anything in the base to help level it out, so for me this has helped. You do have to really tighten it down to make sure that it's not going to slip under the weight of the C-Pan. And for that same reason, they don't necessarily recommend using a video tripod with that bowl type design, which is pretty much what this is. But for me, this has worked out. I will also put a link down below to the tripod that 9.Solutions themselves has used when they're demoing the C-Pan in the past. So you can check that out if you're curious about what they use themselves. So we're just gonna sit this right on top of that 3/8 inch screw, and you can actually start tightening this down with your hand. Once you have it mostly tightened down, you'll take this tool that it comes with and get it really nice and tight down on there. And you might be able to see there's a bubble level right here on the base of the C-Pan. So at this point, you probably want to get this in position where you want to use it, and then just make sure that it's level. For me, I can use that leveling base to make sure it's level. If you don't have that, you can maybe adjust the length of the tripod legs to get everything leveled out. Looking at some of the parts of the C-Pan 2 here, in the back joint we do have a lever underneath that will help you to adjust the alignment of the slider. There is a scale on there, and if you have things right in the center, you'll get a nice straight side to side motion. You can see if you had a camera mounted on here, it's going straight across, staying pointed in the same direction. But if you loosen that up and slide it over to this side here, you will then get a motion that is arced inwards. So you can see here now it's pointing inwards as you slide from one side to the other. If you loosen that up and slide over in the other direction, like this, then it will be the opposite. This will point outward as you slide from one side to the other. You can immediately see what's happening to how the camera is pointed and how it moves, so it is really intuitive. If you're going for an arced movement, either inward or outward, I would advise you to adjust the angle while you're looking at the view from your camera monitor while it's mounted on here. Maybe look at it in the center, have your subject framed up how you want, move to one end of that movement, and then make the adjustment to get your subject framed up how you want it over there, and then you're good to go. Up at the front, you have this little pin slid in here to lock it in place. So it just slides right in there and then kind of locks into the bottom part of the arm, and it will hold it in place there. I do wish this was a little bit longer. It kind of just barely locks in there, but it does work. Here we have the sled where you will mount your camera. You can mount this, of course, directly, or you can use a ball head on here, or you can use a quick release plate like I have on here right now. There is a double-sided screw in here that has a 3/8 inch and a 1/4 inch screw thread on it, so you can flip it around for whatever you need. You have a lever right here on the side, which will let you tilt this plate up and down, and you can go up just a bit more than 45 degrees, and you can also tilt this all the way down so you can get your camera lined up however you want. And then you do have another lever on the side here that will allow you to tilt it from side to side. So this will help you keep your camera level or get it at whatever angle you want. Even if the slider, for example, is tilted to the side, you can keep your camera level using that lever right there. Underneath, you do have one more lever, and this is going to allow you to adjust the angle of the entire C-Pan. So this is an adjustment you cannot do on the Mini. This is built into the larger version, and you do also have this rosette style connection here, so even when this is tilted to the side, it will lock in really securely with that rosette. Let me just show you how that works. Maybe you can see it more clearly from this side here. So you can adjust the angle like that, and then just tighten it down to keep it in place. There you go, nice and solid. This is where you can see I wish the lock pin went in just a little bit further, because at times it can kind of wiggle a little bit and then come out, and you're going to drop the whole arm right there. So I do wish that this slid in just a little bit further, especially for this vertical orientation. Now we haven't yet put on the counterweights because moving it around like this can be a little bit awkward once you have those on there. It gets larger and heavier, but if you do want to attach it, you're going to slide that pole right on here, and you have this little pin in here. You can just push to release, and that's going to help to lock that arm in there. So let's get that on there. All you have to do is slide it on and then slide the pin through the holes to lock it in place. And this is now curved away from where your camera is mounted, so that way it's going to give you more clearance for wide angle lenses, like we said. This is really quick and easy to use, even if you have the weights on there. If you want to move this around, it is quicker just to pull this out and remove the counterweight arm as you move it around, and then slide it back on once you get it into position. Again, just when it's heavier and larger, it is of course a little bit more awkward and difficult to move around and get into position. So that works out pretty well. Of course, once you're actually putting counterweights on, just slide on a lock to hold it in place this way, slide on a couple of counterweights, and then slide on another lock to hold that, and you're good to go, just like that. So besides actually putting a camera on here, that's basically how you're going to set up the C-Pan 2. So now let's just give you a quick rundown of the different types of shots that this can do, the different types of movements that you can do with this. No spectacular shots here, just a demonstration. But let's start out with getting this back to the basic position. So you want to make sure that your tripod legs are either spread out wide enough, or you have some sandbags or something hanging underneath. Especially if you don't have the counterbalance on the front here, just to make sure that as you move this around, your tripod doesn't tip over. When you're in this horizontal position, you don't need the counterweights. They're especially made to help to balance the load if you're moving this vertically. But I have found that it does help. As this moves out to one side, the counterweights move to the other, and it helps to keep that tripod from tipping over more than without it. So if you have the space in front of you, of course it takes up some space in front of you, but if you have that space in front of you, I would recommend using them. But for now, we're going to keep it off and we'll just show you some side-to-side movements. So I'm going to turn on the camera so you can see everything through the camera. And first off, to get just a straight motion straight across, we'll move this over right into the center. You can see that we got that nice straight movement from one side to the other, just like a standard slider. The next type of movement that we have is a curved path. So we'll get our subject centered right here in this central position, and then we'll move out to one side. And then we're going to reposition this rear joint here, so that way our subject is back in our frame. So slide it over to the right. You can see there, okay, our subject came back into frame, and lock it down. So now as we move around this, you'll see that it will, depending on your distance to the subject, not necessarily keep it perfectly centered, but it will arc around your subject. So it's not just a straight side-to-side slide anymore. You are seeing your subject stay in the middle, which is a really nice type of movement. Now the other type won't make much sense here, but that's an outward arc. We only have one subject here, but this is especially useful when you're going between two different subjects. I'll just show you. As you move away from the center, it's going to move off my subject faster in this case because it is arcing outwards. So now if you had, for example, one subject over here and then another one over here, you're going to get that pan from one to the other a little bit more quickly than just a straight pan across, and also a little bit more dynamically than just having a single tripod with a pan head that's panning left and right. So it is an interesting movement, and it can be useful for sure. Again, depending on your focal length, this may be a little bit more or less pronounced, so you can kind of mess around with it and get some very creative results. Let's throw that lock in there and move this back to the center. So now let's go for some angled shots. We'll start off with a 45-degree angle. Of course, you could use this angle if you wanted to for some creative shot, but this is going to be where the angle adjustment comes in handy. So let's just straighten out our camera by using the level on the camera screen. Now, especially when you're in this position, or if you're completely vertical, this is where the counterweight is going to come in handy, because without it, if I loosen this, you can see that this is going to drop really strongly with the weight of the camera. So having that counterweight on there is really going to help to get a steady, smooth movement. Now, how many you'll need will depend on the weight of your camera and everything like that. I've gone ahead and added, this is about 4 kilograms out at the end of that counterweight pole, and you can see it's not going to completely counterweight and balance the weight of the camera here. You could add more weight on there if you wanted to, but it does significantly help the ease of sliding this up and down I can do it just with one finger now. It's much easier to get that smooth and steady movement. Let me get my subject back in the center of the frame here. And now, so with his rear joint still being in the center, we're just gonna get a straight 45-degree angle movement here. So you can see that right there. Let's go for an inward arc here. And now you can see, again, it's keeping our subject in the center, but this is a very dynamic movement that you're getting where, again, depending on the focal length, this may change how it looks a little bit, but you're keeping that subject more or less centered. You're seeing different sides of it instead of just moving straight across in front of it. Very fun movement. You can kind of get up on top of it a little bit here. Now let's just take it full vertical, but I'm gonna remove the counterweight before I do that just to make it a little bit easier to manage as I'm flipping this to the side here. And once again, we're going to use this little knob right here to level our camera out. So now again, we're centered here. So as we remove the pin and slide up and down, you'll see it's just a straight up and down movement past our subject. And this is basically like, a jib. So you can get quite a lot of movement here if you really want to. And again, that counterweight really helps to make this light enough to easily move smoothly and steadily. Switching this up again to what I think is one of the coolest movements that this can do is an inward arced vertical movement. So let's slide that over to the inward arc side of the joint there. And now, as we move this up and down, you can go from kind of bird's eye view up above your subject to in front of it and then looking at it down from below. So you can get some really dynamic movement with this that is definitely very difficult to get without this C-pan. Now, of course, through all of this, we've kept the camera sled straight vertically. We could tilt it down, of course, or tilt it up. If you have something below you on a table, of course, you could angle it down. Your subject's not always straight out in front of you. Obviously, the combinations of different orientations here are pretty much endless. But one more that I want to show you is being able to push out over a tabletop display with this camera pointed straight down, because I think that's a very useful way to use this as well. So let's get that set up. So one thing to show you here is, of course, if your camera is pointed straight out as it has been and you tilt this down, when you move this side to side, your camera is only going to move side to side. Excuse the camera being out of focus here. So if you want to have your camera move vertically over your subject, where it's kind of moving up, I guess you could say, in the frame over your subject when in this downward position, you're going to have to turn it around and mount your camera this way. So I've removed the quick release plate, and we're going to mount the camera directly to this sled with the screw that's in here. Now I have the 3/8 inch screw pointing up, so we're going to flip this around to get the 1/4 screw for my camera. You can see it a little bit better this way. Let's pop this out here. And now we can slide the screw and flip it over. And let's attach our camera. So now when it's flipped up like this, our camera is going to be pointing down. And we're good to go. Ignore the extremely boring subject here, but now you can see as I slide this out, it's sliding over my subject in that vertical motion. Just like that. Of course, we could keep our camera pointing, I guess you could say, straight forward, then tilt this back this way and tilt it down. Let me get this knob out of the way and tilt it down 90 degrees. And then as we move side to side, it's going to be moving sideways through the frame. So ignore the imperfection of my framing here, but you get the idea of how you can move over a tabletop subject in either direction. Of course, you could then go further and curve your arc here to get some really dynamic overhead shots. Again, have fun with it, explore, experiment. The possibilities are going to be endless. Generally speaking, I love this as a tool. I love that it can get a huge variety of shots and a lot of things that would be very difficult to do with another slider, or you would need some really complicated setup that takes time or takes money. Of course, this is not cheap either, but I do think that the value is absolutely there compared to the variety of movement and the steadiness of that movement that you're getting out of this. Like I kind of mentioned before, even taking out all of these special types of curved movements and everything, I think that the fact that you have 140 centimeters of vertical or horizontal travel on a single tripod that is then steady and stable because of that counterbalance and can hold up to 8 kilograms or 6 kilograms vertically, that alone makes this quite a powerful tool. But then add to that, you can get 45-degree paths, you can get any angle in between, and then with all of that, you can curve your path inward or outward to get cool parallax effects or wide spanning panning type slides. There's just a huge amount of things that this can do. Also, because it's trackless, it would allow you to push in or push out and get some types of movement that you wouldn't be able to get with a standard standalone slider. Just again, as a tool, this is an incredible thing to have in your kit. But as a single shooter that often goes out on shoots that are very, very tight scheduled, this is not something I would bring with me every shoot. It is a little bit time consuming to set it up and to move it from one shot to the next, and it can be a little bit overwhelming in tight places, or if you're by yourself because it's heavy and you really want to make sure that you use it safely. It's not something that I would want to use under the pressure of time that I often personally find myself in. I should say that's also true of most more complex motion control systems. Even simple pistol grip gimbals can drive me crazy at times when I'm trying to tinker with them and I have the client watching over me. The main point for me is that when I want something like this can do it with one single tripod, and it gets a huge range of movement, the 140 centimeters of movement, and it gets pretty much any type of movement that I would personally want to have. I would love if it were motorized, and who knows, maybe in the future it could be, and that can really add even another layer of getting really smooth, consistent movement to what this can already do for you. And if we're going to be picky here, some of the things that I have already mentioned, if you watched through that whole boring setup part of the video, I would love to have a little bit more of a secure lock on here. Again, if it's not level, this can definitely slide away under gravity, and the only lock you have in here right now is this little pin, which you probably can't see because it's blurry right now, but it is just a little bit short, and I would prefer to have something that locks in a little bit more securely so I can really not have to worry about this accidentally slipping out and falling down or sliding off to one side or crashing on me. Also, we do have a level on the bottom to see that the C-pan itself is level or not, but I would love to have a level on the camera mounting plate as well, because as you tilt it down or rotate it from side to side, I would love to be able to see for sure if it was level just right there. Of course, you can use the level built into your camera. If you have it, you might not always have that. Could add a little thing on top of there. If they put a bubble level in that camera mounting sled, I think it would really just be a nice little touch to have. And also, I would like to see from the start a custom carry case included with this, whether it was a soft cheap case or a heavy duty hard case. I honestly don't really care. If it had just a soft case with some foam in there, that would be fine for me, but just something to carry this, because you've got the C-pan, you've got the counterbalance arm, you've got the tool to mount it onto the tripod, you've got the counterbalance weights, you've got clamps for the weights holding them on, and maybe even more depending if you're adding like a quick release plate to this or something. So just a case where you could just keep all that and transport it more easily would be great to have from the beginning. Honestly, even if it was just an add-on option for a little bit more cost for people who wanted it, it would be nice to have something really custom made for this. But when it comes all down to it, there are a handful of shots that you can get pretty quickly and easily with this that would be very difficult to do with other more complex systems. So again, what it comes down to is, as a tool, this is a jack of all trades, and definitely something I would be very happy to add to my kit. If it matches your workflow, I definitely recommend it, but do consider strongly what your workflow is and if you have the time and the effort to use something like this and get those great results. Otherwise, if you've stuck through my rambling, you are a saint. But if you like this video, please do consider giving it a thumbs up or sharing it or subscribing if you haven't already. And otherwise, as always, thank you for watching.